everyone, I'm Katie and welcome back to ChapterStackss, where we sometimes talk about thrillers on Thursdays, but today's video is going to be a quick spoiler-free review of Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. But before we get into the summary, pros, cons, and final rating, I wanted to briefly mention that my next video I want to film is my 2024 books that I'm excited to read. And I have a good, healthy list so far, but please let me know, did you have a favorite book you read in 2023? Or more importantly, are there releases coming out in 2024 that you're really excited about, that you would like me to read and review, because I would love to add those to the list. So the reason I'm doing a singular spoiler-free review today, which I haven't done in a really long time, I used to film these types of videos a lot more on my channel, is because I've been trying to read a lot more lately, and I talk about how I'm doing that in my last video I filmed about my lack of attention span when it comes to reading physical books or e-readers. So if you are curious on how to maybe try and read a little bit more from someone who has been struggling a lot over the last few years, I will have that video linked here and at the end. But let's start off with a spoiler-free summary of what Bright Young Women is about. First, if the name Jessica Knoll sounds familiar, that's because I've reviewed a couple of her other books on my channel. I reviewed Luckiest Girl Alive and loved it. That's really what kind of shot her name to fame. But this is her newest release that came out, I think, a number of months ago. It takes place between two time periods and two perspectives. What takes up the bulk of the book is our protagonist, Pamela, and Pamela is the president of her sorority, and when it kicks off, it is 1978. She wakes up at 3 a.m. and a serial killer has broken into the sorority house. Another perspective is years later when she's trying to kind of connect it to another case, and then the third perspective, and this is not a spoiler because you learn that it's going to go this way very, very early on in the book. The other perspective is Ruth, who is in her mid-20s. She's lived kind of a solitary, sheltered life with her very domineering, emotionally abusive mother, and you know going into it that during this perspective, which takes place a few years before the sorority massacre, that Ruth is also going to be one of this killer's victims. So you have that tension at the beginning of the book and then also at the end of the book, kind of waiting, knowing unfortunately what's coming for Ruth. Now, if when I mentioned, and I don't think I said this takes place at Florida State University, but if that sounded a little bit familiar, those kind of high-level plot points, you might have guessed that this is very, very loosely based on Ted Bundy and his crimes. Now let's get into the pros and what I really enjoyed about this book. As I mentioned, this is based on the kind of last crime spree that Ted Bundy committed at also Florida State University at a sorority house. So those high-level plot points and murders are very similar to what happens in this book. But the piece I loved so much about this book and what I read a lot about from interviews with Jessica Knoll is that she's really attracted to the idea of writing books that tell the truth or true story behind narratives that are commonly told in the media that are incorrect. So when we hear about Ted Bundy, when you see Zac Efron play him, for example, he's this charming, suave guy who kind of was able to seduce women into helping him because, you know, he had his hurt arm and he was so attractive and smart and intelligent because he was a lawyer. And it's because of that these women fell prey to his crimes. But when Jessica Knoll was reading a lot of the actual trial transcripts, what she found was that all of these eyewitnesses who saw Ted Bundy approach these women and ask them for help, they continually point out that these women were not seduced or charmed by him. They actively seemed kind of irritated by him and unnerved by him, but just because of the social pressure of a man coming to you who's hurt, asking for help, they could tell that these women just kind of felt forced to say yes. The entire point of this book, and with it even being called Bright Young Women, is about taking that focus away from him. In fact, he's never named throughout the book. He's just called the defendant, and dispelling some myths about how he was and really focusing on these women and how incredibly smart and brave they were and how their lives were snatched away from them so horrifically. Now, I don't believe that these women are based on any of the actual women in history, but it's, again, capturing that idea of dispelling myths about Ted Bundy and keeping the focus on these women. A piece I also learned that was interesting that happens in the book and is also true in real life is that we're so focused on, you know, hearing that he was in law school, and it's kind of hinted that Ted Bundy was really intelligent when in real life he was not, and he was barely scraping by and he was only partially into his first year of law school, and he had to falsify records to even get into law school because he was not a good student. But I deeply cared so much for Pamela and Ruth. They felt like real people, and I equally enjoyed both perspectives. And when books are constantly switching back and forth, there's typically one that I want to get to a little bit more, but I enjoyed these equal parts because Ruth's is really a character study about Ruth, and you have that tension and dread of what's going to come for her. But then with Pamela, it's very much focused on the trial and working with police and all of the frustrations that come with that. So those are just a few reasons for why I really, really love this book. Getting into cons, and I really just have one. And the first part I'm not going to say is not necessarily a con, but it's just something to be aware of going into this book. The first part, and I guess this is also a little bit more of a pro, but that scene at the beginning of the book when he breaks into the house and Pamela is slowly realizing what's happening to her sorority sisters, that she's supposed to be, you know, she's the president, she's supposed to be taken care of, is horrifying and dreadful and so unnerving, and I was riveted. I just want you to be aware of, if you pick up this book, that I would not even necessarily classify this as a thriller at all. It's really more so a character study that does have a horrifying piece at the beginning and a horrifying piece at the end. So it's really more of a character study. It's a little bit more slower paced than you might anticipate based on the topic. So I just want to say, if you're picking this up because you really want a fast-paced thriller, that is not it. So don't read this and come back and comment down below that you picked it up because of me and then you were expecting something that I wasn't. But the reason I am placing this into the cons section is because I do feel that the middle of the book dragged just a tiny bit, not hugely, but I loved the beginning, I loved the end, and the middle did have a little bit of a lull. But again, I loved Ruth and Pamela so much that it really did not bother me. So in the end, I'm going to give Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll 4 out of 5 creepy candles. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Again, please, if you have books that you think I should be adding to my 2024 TBR, please leave them down below. And if you want to find out some tips on how to read a little bit more, that's because of that video, why I'm going to hopefully be posting more videos lately. Please go ahead and check that out, and I will have that linked now. But thanks so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.